Human superstition is something that in today's day and age, we assume it to just be a relic of the past, a more primitive mindset that when we as a species were more fearful of the unknown beyond our fires was kind of a necessary precaution, I guess you could say. While these ideas do persist, typically they are looked on nowadays as just sort of something to be disregarded because we live in more enlightened and modern times. Insert current year meme here. While yes, many of the things that used to frighten us from the past have been actively debunked or shown that there is actually no issue, some stories still continue to warn to this day. And the question you have to ask yourself at that point is why? Once upon a time, these stories or warnings would serve as just that to outsiders or possibly young in the area. Whether it was true or witnessed by adults or just something that was passed down to them when they were a youngling, for some reason, there was once truth in those words concerning the actual danger surrounding whatever tale was being told. In the United Kingdom, or the Irish area of the UK, way north in the woods, this section of forest was currently under threat of being completely destroyed. Sounding like an established titles ad, a man and woman and their newborn from London would then head out there to study the trees in an attempt to preserve them. However, a man named Colm, who owns property near the forest down the road, would continuously warn Adam as well as his wife about ominous things in the woods that if he put down his roots, they would be named Hallow. Of course, when you are speaking cryptically, I mean, what's a dude supposed to do? Ignoring this as just some sort of intimidation factor, Adam would do what most people do with a newborn and a freshly married couple. Ignore it completely and move in anyways because they got the house for practically a steal. Don't worry about the doll upstairs breakdancing in the meantime. It's a feature, not a haunting. It became apparent to Adam rather quickly, however, that something was out in the woods and it wasn't necessarily happy about them being there. As these things would launch an attack on the family, he would begin to realize there were more to these creatures than just being monsters in the woods, and that wouldn't bode well for him or the functionality of his meat suit. So in today's episode, let's discuss the infection that appears to jump multiple species in this movie, the Hallow, and then talk about the effects that it seems to have on humans. Didn't see you there. Thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate you checking out this video. If you like it, then please like as it gets it out in the algorithm. And if you really like the channel, feel free to subscribe. I upload like once or twice a week at this point, so there's always new content coming out down the pipeline, and enjoy. We begin our episode with quite literally like 12 production companies. Good God, that is a lot of production for this bad boy. But since we persevered through the gauntlet of production, we were finally rewarded with a reading. The words Hallow be their name, and blessed be their claim. If you who trespass put down roots, then Hallow be your name. Basically, what was here first owns the land. If you want to try to take that land, you will become them. Yeah, until humanity created chainsaws and fire. Do the Irish have a chant of patriotism that I could put here? If not, y'all should make one. So now we finally open up to a mossy forest with a deer looking around. A tree has fallen over and this appears to be something to do with something. We will figure this out later in more detail, but Adam and Claire are doing the Coming to America ferry ride scene as they drive across the Highlands afterwards. At least I think this is the Highlands. Which, fun fact, you ever look at the Highlands in Ireland and think to yourself, well, that looks exactly like Blue Ridge, Georgia? I would assume you don't. But if you ever do, it's because it actually is the same mountain range. The Appalachians are a part of the same range back on, I believe it was Pangea around 300 million years ago. In fact, once upon a time, they used to be the same height as the Rockies. Greenland has the same range and extends all the way out into Ireland and Scotland, and I believe some parts of northern England. And the Atlas Mountains in Morocco are also a part of this same chain. Of course, the trees are prettier in Ireland, that's all I'm gonna say. But over on the radio, we hear how these trees are being deforested at an alarming rate, which just plant more. So as Adam and his son walk through the forest, he marks trees that are either dead or infected with a fungal growth in an effort to conserve the forest as it is. He is staying at a new home that's pretty nice and has really nice metal bars all over the window. Nice. As Adam walks along the bridge, he has lost sight of his dog as the youngling begins crying and drops its pacifier. I feel like this offspring has almost been dangerously poked in the eyes several times during filming by these tree branches. I mean, that cannot be safe. But as Adam follows the barking, he happens upon an abandoned house. He looks in the corner and then spots a deer who seems to have succumbed to blurry neck syndrome. Also, ducking under a beam, that youngling almost caught said beam to the dome. Anyhow, back to the deer. Tragic way to go. He then looks at the blur and finds that there are growths of fungal stalks coming out of it, something he's never seen before. He then sterilizes his knife and takes a sample for later. Meanwhile, back at the house, Claire has visitors. The farmer, or Colm as he's known, is upset. Adam is apparently trespassing in the woods, but it's not really said of Colm that he doesn't own the woods, because he's upset the woods are being torn down. So Karen should probably get over it. So he says, though, it's dangerous, and here's the problem. People always speak so vaguely that you don't really know why it's dangerous. Why don't you tell them, like, specifically what's dangerous about this? Otherwise, it just sounds like you're making really bad threats. This upsets Claire, as Colm insists that he needs to talk to Adam that night and not tomorrow. Also, in the background, that is a 1991 Toyota Hilux, affectionately known as the N100. The 5th generations of these things are by far the best trucks on the planet because they're basically indestructible. I mean, it does only have a 2.4 liter engine, so it's not exactly the most strong thing in the world, but with its longer wheelbase and the fact that the only thing that could replace it was the actual Tacoma, these are one of those trucks that, apart from like my 3rd gen 4Runner that I love, I would snatch one of these up in a heartbeat because it'll probably outlive me. All I can say is this movie has great taste, you should watch it, and of course, Toyota supremacy. So Claire then heads back inside where she finds her husband heroically hiding out, avoiding that dude outside. I mean, that's what it looks like anyways. It's always possible he just got there, but it's kind of doubtful he wouldn't have heard the conversation going on out front. He then hands her to the youngling as he goes to check, like, some of his books. Nerd, it figures. He's trying to save the forest, and the farmer is angry at him because he's trying to save the forest too, or he's angry that somebody's selling the forest because it's all privately owned. You would think they'd be on the same side. Later that night, as Adam is surveying the area, he puts a pin on a map as Claire heads upstairs to put the youngling down. Meanwhile, checking on the fungus, we see something rather interesting. As he looks into his microscope, we see life behaving rather oddly. Both are eukaryotic cells. One is obviously an unaltered, likely deer cell, while the other has several flagella in which to move. But not only that, it appears to have a harpoon system of sorts in which to spear another cell. So what's the deal with that? Well, let's discuss what we see in nature, which will help us to understand what we are seeing here. Now, the concept of a cell spearing another cell may seem pretty odd. When thinking about anything spearing a cell typically in mind, it'll kind of be drawn to the idea of virus interactions with cells for the explicit purpose of replication. But what's interesting is it's also seen in certain prokaryotes that they will possess this trait to be utilized as they see fit. But to understand this at all, we need to take it way back, like way back, to a hypothesis based on viral influence on cells in the first place. Life itself is rather complex, and to be completely transparent as a biologist, none of us have all the answers. Be careful around someone claiming that they do 100% certainty know that this is how it started, because things that even I believe are based on belief and not something that I can say without a doubt happened. Regardless of personal hangups, when it comes to viruses, we see some pretty interesting traits. The main one being their absolute hijacking of a cell and how they also infect that cell initially. So a long time ago, when life was in a much more primitive state, there were, well, depending on which biologist you talk to, 2 variants of life. You had cellular life, which is established to be life itself, and then you had viruses. Personally, I do not believe viruses are living, as they do not meet all the criteria for life, but it is what it is. Others will call me a complete hack and say, no, it's definitely alive. And I would counter with, well, if it doesn't meet all of the criteria of life, you're the hack. Anyways, through interactions within the ocean, viruses that came into being would attack the prokaryotes that also were in being. Phrasing it like this, you can kind of see why it's such a strange form of life, as it seems to be almost separate from the regular life that we see all around us now, especially way back in the day. And that's why there's a conspiracy theory that viruses are not even from this planet, but inadvertently got seeded here and began attacking the life on this planet, which again is a pretty interesting concept. But life would do what life always does and adapt. The prokaryotes would need to change and alter the way that they function in order to survive, as they developed internal mechanisms in order to essentially deal with this viral infection. Over time, this would lead to what we all know, CRISPR, or clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. This would allow for viruses to infect the prokaryote, but the prokaryote could answer and destroy the virus. However, not before potentially some of the virus's own genetic coding was disseminated into the prokaryote itself. Over time, this genetic sequence became entrenched in the coding of the prokaryotes, and this may have had some far-reaching consequences later. So the jump from prokaryote to eukaryote is almost as profound as the formation of life on this planet to begin with. But what was the push? What caused life to change so drastically given how successful prokaryotes still are to this day? Arguably, it was the absorption of one cell into another, which became the regular cell in the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, as we all know. And then the formation of organelles would form specific jobs to further protect also the DNA of the cell, which then enveloped behind another membrane, being known as the nucleus from here on out. So, what does this have to do with anything, I can hear you asking? Trust me, the process of life is rather interesting. As we know, these eukaryotes would go from single-celled to multicellular to us talking about them, which is pretty meta. So, That doesn't mean, though, that we don't have eukaryotes that are not just free-living, single-celled organisms. In fact, the most horrifying one to me personally is the brain-eating amoeba that stalks pretty much every body of fresh water here in the South, and if it gets far enough up your nose, it eats your brain. But eukaryotes would exhibit traits that prokaryotes would never have. Along with this would have echoing implications later. I mean, I kind of mentioned this a lot, but take the fertilization of an egg, for instance, by a sperm. Considering humans have 8% of our genome attributed to ancient viruses that actually, ironically, in some capacity stops us from being infected by viruses to this day, it is safe to say there is potential in the idea that viruses have had an impact on cells to the point it would alter their behavior and various structures. Rounding back to my point, the egg and the sperm, a cell forcibly enters another cell in order to disseminate its genetic coding to produce life. Where would a cell have learned this? Well, there is a concept. It may have essentially been controlled by viral coding, which forced it to invade another cell, which ultimately may have worked. This potential direction by a virus may be seen in other areas of life as well. As we all know, viruses are goated when it comes to breaking into cells. In some ways, they are invited by having the right set of protein configurations on their surface that the cell believes it is something that it knows, so it draws the virus in. In other instances, the virus will just straight up stab a cell, injecting its genetic information. But what do we see with other cells concerning this? In bacteria, it is known there is a rare type that will create spears to defend themselves. These multi-protein complexes, known as the type 6 secretion system, or T6SS, are proteins that form a spear-like structure that if another cell, such as say an immune cell, gets too close, it will send this structure out tipped with a cytotoxic protein that can damage the DNA and disrupt the function of the speared cell. As it pierces the membrane, the protein literally fires as quickly into that cell as it's over in a matter of milliseconds. The spike poisons the cell, which then can lyse it in the process or render it at least immobile as the nucleus is disrupted. From here, the bacteria is relatively safe. Now, this is seen in prokaryotes, but therein lies the interesting part. How did it jump to a eukaryotic cell? Well, given what we know about animal reproduction, what we will learn about this cell that he found, it becomes rather clear what is happening here. But we will get to that momentarily when we talk about the human immune system and the Hallow infection. After witnessing this, it kind of confirms it because some of the cells begin undergoing apoptosis. Up in the youngling's room, Claire then spots a black liquid leaking from the ceiling onto the bed. Coming downstairs, she tells Adam about what she found and surmises the roof is about to cave in. Heading up to the attic, the roof appears to be totally fine. No damage, no cave-ins, no dancing dolls in the corner of the room, but finger-like appendages growing from the wall are totally missed. Very nice. As they're making dinner, they start rolling doobies, and Adam begins telling Claire about cordyceps and what it does. Claire's like, well, as long as you didn't bring this back to the house, which you did, right? And he's like, yeah, I did. So we didn't make it very far before jumping back into the science, but that's just as the good Lord intended. Now that the movie has already hinted at and pretty much told you what we were dealing with here, we can talk about it. In the eukaryotic branch of life, I've always found it pretty fascinating where fungi actually splits from animals and plants. And when you're looking at it, I mean, you would probably expect it to be more closely related to plants. But the reality is it's actually more closely related to animals. Because of this, we can establish a baseline when it comes to things like cordyceps. While clearly not exactly like animal cells, they have quite a few similarities. And these similarities are what I believe is causing specifically this cordyceps to be able to affect other species. So let's start here. This cordyceps that Adam found behaves differently from the standard variants found in other parts of the Earth or in The Last of Us. This could be for a multitude of reasons, but it may be that the environment itself pushed it to this point, or there was some sort of viral infection. So first things first, much like how all of our cells that are animal cells possess 8% of coding from their genetics and viruses, I would hazard a guess to say that these fungal cells also possess coding from viruses as well. Given its interaction with the area, these implantations in its genetic coding had a very different impact. While it appears our integrated coding protects, as mentioned, from potential infections and may have influenced the very way that we reproduce, in fungal cells, it instilled adaptations such as the spearing mechanism, which operates very similarly to how a virus may infect another cell. But why would this spearing mechanism be useful? As we have seen when Adam is walking through a forest marking trees, they are infected with something, as he has stated. That something is this fungus. Harkening back to 5th grade biology class, as we all know, plant cells are more durable than animal cells because of the cell wall that they possess rather than just the membrane. This would necessitate the need for a spear-like adaptation to pierce this cell wall and gain the nutrients from inside. When coming across an animal cell, however, these cells appear to be even more vulnerable given their lack of a more sturdy wall-like structure. We will see how this fungus operates later when dealing with plant cells as well as human cells. Claire begins talking about draining the pasta, if you know what I mean, as the offspring upstairs begins cooing. And yes, this is one of those things, when you have offspring, gentlemen, you aren't going to be going 20 toes for a while, so buckle up. So Claire heads upstairs as the youngling begins crying as they hear glass break, so she picks up the pace a bit. The door then slams as Adam breaks in and grabs Finn. Thinking it's calm, Adam then calls the police. So they figure someone from outside threw a lamp. The officer attempts to explain it away somewhat, saying maybe it was just a bird. Yes. All right then. So can we get somebody out here who's maybe competent? The officer informs Adam that pretty much everyone in town is nervous having him going around poking in the woods. The officer explains that people here have certain beliefs, mostly how the land belongs to fairies, banshees, and baby stealers. Adam asks the officer if he believes it, to which he remarks, "No, I'm from further up north. We have way worse things up there." Okay, so now we need a movie about that. The officer mentions in a final thing that a girl named Cora, Calm's daughter, wandered into the woods one day and never came back just a few months ago. So that doesn't bode well. Adam at this point then heads outside to go take some pictures for evidence. As he does, he hears something cracking sticks in the woodline. Taking a picture, we then spot your average Reddit mod policing any opinion for him. Turning to his right, he hears his dog growling at something but can't see it. Looking out, he decides to head over to the shed as he hears a baby crying in there. But once he enters, he sees nothing. Closing the door and exiting, we can hear, well, you guys can't. I could hear another cry come from within, but he doesn't, so he doesn't head back. The next morning, High Times over here slept till noon on the couch. Okay, so as we were about to see just chef's kiss driving that made me laugh, Adam is the most distractible. There's no possible way I could ever crash, but let me focus on everything else but driving driver I have ever seen portrayed. Changing out his cassette tape, he drives towards town as Claire stays and cleans up. The quadruped then gets up to go look at something as Claire finds a weird animal in the bed sheets. Going into town, well, nobody's happy to see our boy Adam over here as he heads to a window shop to get it fixed. He's then told that he's trespassing upon them, and so they trespass upon him. And that, well, I can fix your window, but there's no point unless you put those metal bars back up. How would he know that? Spooky happenings is why. But you're probably asking yourself, why iron? I mean, sure, it'll keep these things physically out, but why iron? Well, don't worry. I know that you are asking that. This is actually some really ancient lore that might have its roots in reality. The supernatural aspect is that iron is pure and can drive away evil spirits, yet we will see in a very literal sense that iron can keep away these creatures. Knowing that this is a fungus and not so much a supernatural event, how would iron actually work? Well, strap in, because it's great to learn. There are a few studies in the world that state something about iron actually does impact or have impact on the life expectancy of certain types of fungus. Specifically, wood-eating fungus, which we're about to see, is important. Iron is intrinsically linked to the function of life, at least on this planet, but it can also induce problems should it enter another form. When it's working as intended in the Fe2+ form, it's not really a problem, but when it enters the Fe3+ form, this is when it can actually lead to it becoming toxic. Upon entering this form, it induces free radicals to build up, which can lead to genetic damage to cells, destroying them in the process. Because we know iron in its pure form, when applied to wood, can actually destroy fungal cells, or at least prevent them from growing and destroying the wood that exists. And this is why iron bars on the window does make sense from a biological perspective, as well as a practical one and not just a superstition-based one. But at the house, Colm does the hilarious thing, which I don't know why you would ever do this, and literally just lets himself in, scaring the crap out of Claire. Now, if you don't want someone to think you're crazy, looking at them and saying, "Do you think I'm crazy? I'm not crazy. You're crazy, Ghost of Napa," is probably not going to be the move, my dude. But then he pulls out a giant book of fairy tales out of his jacket. Yes, very sane move, I must say. Bravo. So after the Prankum John moment, we see that driving I mentioned earlier is prepare yourself. Adam passes a house, right? So he just focuses on that for really no reason, as then the youngling drops their toy in the back, as then he's like, well, I haven't looked at the road in a while. I might as well focus on trying to reach back here and grab that toy. Instead of, pressing the brakes, I'm gonna keep my foot on the gas. As he does, he almost runs over his neighbor, which isn't gonna help the relationship there. He then focuses on later the tape that is just kind of being destroyed. And instead of stopping the car, he chooses to almost wreck at 20 miles per hour. Bro, what was that? Take your foot off the gas. So at this point, he goes to check the engine and it's got goop all over it, just as I suspected. And then he hears something. Looking out into the woods, he sees nothing but crawls halfway into the trunk to grab one thing, which... okay, man. He then gets pushed in and knocked out until night. He begins hearing scraping noises on the car as he tries to get out, eventually birthing himself out of the back seat, much like Ace Ventura exiting out of the Rhino. Seeing nothing attacking the car but the youngling is screaming, he then grabs Finn and decides to hoof it out of there, spotting large claw marks on the side of his car. Walking off into the woods, he hears his dog barking as he goes inside of the house, but nobody really believes in having any light on in the house at night apparently, as Adam goes to get the old pellet thrower. He clears the house and then tells Claire to call the police, as in the power is cut to the house. The window immediately breaks as Adam heads downstairs and can hear rummaging. The camera flash keeps going off as he enters the room calling out to Colm. He yells about his daughter and then enters the room firing a shot and hitting his camera, or at least I guess the stand. Also, this guy is like an Olympian in terms of not answering his wife. She calls out to him several times, then finally he answers, I guess taking in the fact that his man cave is ruined. He has a nice freak out about how he's furious at Colm. He hilariously says, "I won't be intimidated by this man," with tears in his eyes, which might be a little too late for that, bro. You seem sort of intimidated. He then spots the book as they both head outside to look for the dog and leave the area. Finding the dog snacking on what appears to be a toupee, the dog's eye is red and inflamed. Grabbing the quadruped, it starts barking as they see something in the distance. The dog gets grabbed by that something as Adam lets out another shot. The car engine has even more goop on it now, and getting it running, Claire looks up and spots these things are surrounding the car. He closes the hood as they spot, well, one of them's behind Adam, as then they make a break for it. They keep throwing, I assume, are just rocks at it as they drive off the road, narrowly missing one wearing a dress. The things are still hunting them actively at this point, so it's time to pick up a stick and a rock and show them why man is the thing to fear. They realize at this point, well, this is not Colm, it's something else entirely. Adam does a dumb thing and looks out through a keyhole, which is just asking for your eye to get Dead Space 2 machined, and that's exactly what happens. Ouchies. So this is Adam's infection point where his body will begin changing. As that's going on, the creatures begin to try to break in as they leak ooze through the keyhole. He goes to check and then spots it. Looking like an emaciated sapling, the thing then runs in fear at the sight of light as Claire heads up to the attic so Adam can head out to the shed. It appears light works on these creatures for several reasons. The first is, as we know, they are infected with a fungus. Specifically, this area's native cordyceps. Fungi does not really enjoy being in the sun and prefers dark, wet, cool places in which to grow and break down biological material. Exposure to the sun would absolutely affect its ability to survive, as we will see, by desiccating the structures, rendering it embodied. Because of this susceptibility and how deeply it has affected the human form, the body can no longer protect the fungal infection on the inside, making it susceptible to that light, causing it to flee at the mere sight of it, even if it's not really the sun. But why does this work the way it does? I'm glad you asked. Let's discuss some neurology of this infection. The brain is an extensive and complicated piece of biological machinery. As light is taken in through the eyes and retina, these will become electrical signals to report to the occipital lobe via the optic nerve. Now, one of the pretty cool things is blue light specifically will activate the pineal gland as the optic nerve runs right past it. And this is why if you look at screens before bed, you might find it hard to sleep because your pineal gland is telling your body it's daytime by inhibiting the release of melatonin. Considering how deeply the infection has taken root in a person, it's clear to me it is in the brain, as well as given how it influences behavior, this is pretty much assured. As it becomes more integrated into the brain structure, it is likely it would begin reacting to the operation of the body in terms of functions to let it know what's happening on the outside, basically using your senses to sense what's happening out there. When the creature sees light, for instance, certain pathways and hormones will be released in the brain, such as the lack of melatonin from the pineal gland, that the cordyceps may then also have adapted to basically turn this into a warning system for the body that it is now in light, which means it needs to retreat back to darkness. The goop is everywhere as Claire looks down and sees that the wood is literally melting. This would further confirm that not only is this a fungal infection of the wood, but it can also jump to humans. And again, this supports the idea of why these creatures would fear pure iron, as it can disrupt fungi's biological functioning. She then calls out to Adam as a hand breaks through the wood, but of course he's not going to answer because when has he answered ever before? The creatures also know Adam is actually in the shed starting up the generator. The hand reaches out for Claire and we see Adam's iris is starting to change due to his infection. The hand of the creature also starts trying to infect Claire by basically forming little tiny spears. Bro, move your head. Adam is able to get the generator running though, which then scares the creature off. Looking at his hand, he has injured it, and yep, that thing is mega infected. So, how does this infection spread? As we're about to see here in a moment, the cordyceps doesn't just grow within the body, utilizing the natural resources within, but also appears to have influence over the genetics of a person somewhat, likely owing this to the hypothesized virus interaction of this area that changed how the cordyceps operates. As we know, the cordyceps will spear a cell, but the outcome will not be the same. So for regular cells, it would appear that the spear may implant genetic coding, which the outcome will be the formation of new structures, such as the eyes changing. This could also be as simple as a response to the immune system in the eyes. And okay, so there's a stupid, just dumb statement floating around that if the immune system knew that we had eyes, it would immediately attack it. I absolutely hate this statement. Whoever stated that had passing knowledge of how the body works. And by passing, I mean they probably walked by an open immunology book and then made that up. The immune system knows you have eyes. What? Does the immune system just not enter those blood vessels in an effort to stop itself for reasons unknown? No, that's stupid. What the eyes are known for is an immune privileged site, sort of like your gonads, your brain, and your fat tissue. And this is for your eyes, brain, and gonads specifically, but essentially inflammation in the area is typically prevented as not to harm the delicate tissue. But in the eyes, there are still immunological functions. And this is why when you get conjunctiva, it's your immune system actively fighting an infection in the tissue. But apparently people don't have their eyes melt during this instance. So strange, isn't it? Why am I so salty over this? Anyhow, so yes, the immune system does operate within your eyes, and it's well aware that you have eyes, even preventing itself from overreacting because of this. Fatty tissue, by the way, is immune privileged because it's hard to patrol. This is why things like cellulitis can kind of get out of control. But all right, anyhow, once entering the eyes, because of this decreased immune response, the fungi then hits the iris first, which will begin to alter these cells through the same spear-like function. It's clear it has also entered virtually every other area of the body as well, using the circulatory system as a highway to entrench the infection more deeply, which we will talk about how it launches an attack on the immune system once we get past this next part. So Adam goes to check his eye. Well, that's definitely showing signs of an immunological response as well as changing overall, which causes him to panic somewhat. He elects to cover his eye and then sneak up on Claire at this point and start to put together a plan. Light and iron are what these creatures actually fear, which is why being a paladin is the way forward. It always has been. But they put iron all over the windows and then light up the place to try to hold out till morning as the creatures are already crawling on the house. Adam puts Finn in a dumbwaiter, much to the dismay of Claire, but the generator isn't going to hold out all night, and they're going to need to fight these things at some point, which is why they want him in there, because they won't have to worry about it. As Adam looks through a book, he comes across a changeling. So what is a changeling? Well, I'm glad again. You're just full of questions today, aren't you? There's a lot of lore on changelings, but interestingly, it appears to be something that was of great concern for people in Europe and Africa back in the day. A changeling was some form of species that would steal away the offspring of a human and instead replace it with their own. In specifically Irish folklore, a fairy would take offspring for one of three reasons. For the offspring to serve them, because they love the offspring, or for malice. There was a fourth reason. It's when a fairy aged, they wanted humans to take care of them so that they could live out, I guess, the remainder of their life in comfort. Now, this would have a very practical effect on the family. Back in the day, the family survived as everyone was useful, but changelings were notoriously ravenous when it came to hunger and would be a constant drain on the family. And when you were living that close to the razor's edge, I mean, anything could tip the balance. But they would never grow to the size of a normal youngling and seem to be strangely intelligent for their age. They also might have a beard, weirdly enough. But as time would pass, they could quite literally out-eat the other younglings, leading them to become malnourished, or the parents themselves to starve trying to feed this thing. What would become of the human that was taken is unknown, but the parasitic changeling would behave strangely, such as like jumping around when alone or playing instruments. So all you musicians out there, everyone's onto you. The concept of the changeling would also lead to infanticide should the offspring become too burdensome, as a fear would develop that the offspring was in fact a changeling. Survival will push people to do some pretty wild things. But eventually Claire elects to check on Finn regardless of what Adam says. As she does this, well, look at that, there's a creature in there with Finn. So she freaks out as Adam is then able to break open the beam and realizes these things are moving through the wood of the house as the fungus eats the wood and they are able to move through, which is seen several times before. Finding the creature in the attic, he gets knocked down and knocked out as Claire has to go find this thing and retrieve the youngling. Heading outside, she spots the creature running away and then she gives chase. Adam finally starts waking up and he's not looking too great. Listening to the baby monitor, Claire continues to chase Finn through the woods as Adam's cells are getting harpooned. Claire then spots Finn's clothing in the water as she dives down and finds him down there. Surprisingly, looking up at the creatures in the trees, she's able to get away from them and get back to the house, finding Adam having fixed his leg and looking even worse. He wants Finn and then holds him as Claire gets changed. As Adam looks at him, he says this is not Finn. He accuses Finn of being a changeling. Claire tries to take him back, telling him that he's losing it. He then runs off with Finn, looking at him, as then he knocks down Claire. He takes a nail, telling it to show itself as he makes a small cut, seeing the creature freak out. Of course, he could just be straight tripping considering he's infected, and this is definitely in his brain. Claire is able to stab him to get him to let go, as Adam yells about it's not really Finn. Running to the shed, she locks herself in with Adam trying to break in. He keeps telling her it's a changeling. He attempts to reason with her about it, but he's really not making a great case for not being completely insane by infection. He then starts seizing on the ground in the light as he grabs her leg. Also, this guy screams exactly like Randy Marsh. It made me laugh every time. At this point, he now has fungal stalks growing out of his shoulder, and his eye has completely changed. So you might be asking yourself, where is his immune system? Well, despite what this would have you believe, the immune system is well equipped to deal with fungal infections. And the reason is, every single breath you take, you breathe in mold spores. If our bodies were not able to destroy fungus completely readily, and with extreme prejudice, our lungs would be overwhelmed in days of breathing our first breath on this planet. So what's going on? Well, if prokaryotes are anything to go off of, this spearing that has been seen in both bacteria and now this fungus would be protecting itself from the immune system. As the fungus showed up, the innate immune system would be the first on the scene with white blood cells. These are excellent at absorbing fungi and destroying them through phagocytosis. Given enough time, the body is typically quite successful in eliminating fungi from the body. However, there are instances where this is an issue, and I believe this is why it's so readily able to overwhelm the human immune system. As the battle continues, some white blood cells are invariably destroyed through spearing mechanisms. Some fungi are consumed by white blood cells, but as it goes on, the white blood cells will begin to become exhausted. Dendritic cells will obviously pick up pieces of fungi where they will take it back to the lymph nodes to recruit B cells to create antibodies, but this will take a few days, and that's the adaptive immune system. But what's strange is how the fungus is still able to propagate so readily under these conditions, well beyond the normal fungal infection range, and I believe I do have the answer. This fungus, as I have stated throughout, has been altered by a virus of some sorts. Because of this, it has changed how the cordyceps acts, allowing it to have a more aggressive means of infecting and surviving. I believe this does something else to the fungus as well. One of the little known things about the human immune system is white blood cells can actually throw back up what is consumed in a process known as vomocytosis. This is seen in people who are HIV positive who contract a fungal infection as the white blood cells try to free themselves up for combating this viral invader that never leaves. This allows for opportunistic fungus to propagate in the body, which is typically going to result in the end of that person. Because it's usually not HIV that kills you, but it's either cancers or some type of opportunistic infection. Typically, vomocytosis is not how the immune cells perform, but it appears in the grand scheme of things, a viral infection is a more pressing matter for your body than a fungal one, more so when resources are already low due to HIV breaking down the immune system. With the cordyceps infection, it may be that either a virus is still present in the fungal load, making it a co-infection, and this could cause the immune cells to throw back up the fungus, allowing it to almost spread throughout unchecked while the body deals with the virus that came with it. What sort of virus this could be is unknown, but along with this, the cordyceps also is spearing other immune cells further, decreasing their effectiveness, allowing for the fungus to rapidly spread throughout the body, quickly making stalks and overwhelming the meat suit to the point that within just a few nights, they will completely change. So grabbing a scythe, he then lights it on fire and then heads out in the wilderness to do some reaping. Yelling out to Claire, "Yeah, I don't think she's coming back, brother," but he follows the sound of the youngling crying. Entering the abandoned house, the scythe has been on fire for like 3 years at this point. Moving deeper, he finds his dog, as well as just hit the mother lode of infected individuals. Realizing he is now in the heart of the Hallow, we get a really good look at these things' physiology of what becomes of humans if Adam's current transformation is anything to go off of. First things first, they are in a hominid form. They are called the Hallow, and it is assumed based on lore they are related to humans in some form or fashion, or could potentially even be humans converted. Their skin is typically dry and desiccated, and their skulls are quite prominent as their features have sucked onto the skeleton underneath. Now the skull is deformed somewhat, and this is likely due to stalks actually growing and cracking the bone apart. The teeth are usually visible to some degree, and the nose has fallen off of the face. The eyes are either incredibly difficult to see or sunken in masses, with some appearing as black orbs in their socket. Most mammalian features are now gone, with their hair having completely fallen out. The hands still have 5 fingers and are now several inches in length, appearing black and ashen. Their abdomens sport very little muscle definition, as it's probably been broken down over time to support the fungus, and they have also taken on a more quadrupedal form of locomotion. They crawl across the ground, which does raise them up on the balls of their feet, giving them a false digitigrade stance, as they still very much so have a plantigrade structuring of the leg and foot. On their body, the stalks can be seen growing elsewhere, such as like with the deer, and they can also be seen growing on these creatures as well, indicating the same thing took out the deer, and it's also the same thing that has infected them. They appear to hunt with a pack mentality, showing their roots to be more human, albeit quite feral as a result of living out here so long. It appears their clothes eventually just fall off of their bodies over time due to exposure to the elements, as one still actually has their dress on. This is Cora, as we know. So this does at least show some semblance of their humanity. Claire then gets to Colm's house and asks for help, and he says he can't help, mainly because he's a coward. They took his daughter, and rather than him do the human thing, like which is seek sweet, sweet revenge and going out in a blaze of glory, he just decides he won't do anything, and instead I'm just gonna hide in my house. Real alpha Chad over here. So Colm then runs Claire off back into the woods as Adam continues his standoff. He spots one in particular that gives him pause. Again, it's Cora. She still has her dress on and is holding Finn. She appears to recognize her name somewhat as she shows the pacifier to Adam and then gives it to Finn. The creatures all sort of like hang out as Adam then tells her no, and this would harken back to the lore that sometimes they take offspring simply because they love them. This likely being one of those instances, but after this, Cora gets upset as Adam starts going goblin mode on the Hallow. Claire at this juncture isn't having a good time. Taking a picture to keep the creatures away, they're all around her and reacting less and less to the light. They don't seem to be trying to attack her, though interestingly enough, just kind of drive her out of the forest. I wonder why that is. Getting back up and surrounded, he then falls off a small cliff. Adam actually has a pair between his legs, so unlike Colm, he shows up with Finn, the real Finn. He yells at the creatures behind him as they start reacting to him and his aggression more than anything else. Adam attempts to tell her the thing that she's holding is the changeling. As Adam starts just absolutely wrecking the one that tried to attack, he beats the creature to its pulpy end, indicating his brain has reached the point that is no longer likely limiting his strength, highlighting the infection is almost complete. He then turns, taking out Cora in the process because she showed up and just randomly yelled at him. So now he turns back to Claire, telling him to take the real Finn. He then takes a hand to the guts from another Hallow Man. So Claire must make her choice with daylight coming through the tree. I mean, if one doesn't do well in the light, I guess she could have just taken both and see which one burns, but never mind that. She then grabs the one that Adam brought as the creatures begin retreating. As the youngling lays there, at first nothing happens, which concerns Adam, as he might have had like a well crap moment, but it then begins burning in the sunlight, indicating it is in fact a changeling, as the baby Claire took was the right one. Adam then succumbs to his wounds, going out like an actual man, whereas Colm still sucks. Back at the house, Claire then returns to grab a few things, with her life essentially ruined, but at least she has the right youngling and won't get her blood or bank account sucked dry while she sleeps. As the credits roll, we see the forest getting cut down because a survey from the dad never really came in, so they just kind of were like, all right, cut it all down, boys, which I'm not really for, but if it happens to be some horrific creature's particular section of the woods that we can clear out and replant with regular trees, hey, why not? A truck then drives by and it's got the same black goo on it, which can be seen everywhere else, which indicates this has the potential that it could spread pretty much across the world, causing something like, The Last of Us. But oh, what's that? One final jump scare, and this one actually got me when I watched it because I was just not expecting it. And thus concludes The Hallow. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, leaving a like is awesome of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post, like the 2 videos a week at this point. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and channel links in the description of Roanoke Tales, where last week we talked about the vanishing of Flight 19 over the Bermuda Triangle, but speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astronaut Rosie Kinks. I do appreciate it. I also like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, as well as our scientist, Argent Sentinel, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanations of B-grade horror movies, Logan Satome, Lucian Dragon, Robbie Cruz, and Tyson Nakanishi. And the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping this channel running and is greatly appreciated. Also, just letting everybody know, I will be in Seattle next week for PAX West. If you see me out there, nobody ever recognizes me anyways, so I'll see you, but you won't see me. But that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.